So we researched the life cycle assessment of different bioplastics. And conventional petroleum-based plastics are becoming a dire environmental problem. Conventional plastics not only use non-reusable resources, but also take hundreds of years to degrade. Bioplastics can be a great alternative to these plastics. And for our definition, bioplastics are plastics made from renewable biomass sources through microorganisms.
More specifically, we looked into bioplastics made from agricultural materials, PHB, PLA, and cellulose-based plastics, PHB from whey, PLA from cornstarch, and cellulose-based plastics from corn stover.
All right, so we examined the life cycle assessments of our product, which was bioplastics. So we assessed environmental impacts of a certain product, bioplastic, and you could also do different processes for life cycle assessments. So a life cycle assessment just looks at all of the inputs and outputs from each given step. When you define that, you're looking at the inventory analysis. These inputs and their specific values can be found in LCA databases, and this data can be interpreted in CIMAPRO or OpenLCA. And there's two main types of life cycle assessments. There's cradle to gate, which is from the very beginning until it hits the market. And then there's cradle to grave, which is from the very beginning until the end of its life. So seeing where it ends up, like in a landfill, being composted or recycled.
These flowcharts outline the different waste scenarios for conventional and bioplastics and the different outputs of each scenario. As you can see, bioplastics still have toxicity issues. However, unlike petrochemical plastics, they become more of a feedback loop because the greenhouse gas emissions can be reabsorbed by bioplastic sources. This is a look at how our Lakeshore campus manages waste. This is data I compiled of the greenhouse gas emissions of Lakeshore campus's current rates, assuming that we use 100% PP plastics, and projections if we were to switch over to bioplastics, assuming we use 100% PLA bioplastics. Although the landfill rates for PLA plastics are extremely high, remember that if we were to switch over to bioplastics, combustion and compost would be more commonly used, and the greenhouse gas emissions could be reabsorbed by those bioplastic sources. To explore this further, I would look into a risk assessment of other outputs from each waste scenario, such as nanoparticles or microplastics.
So I looked into the use of whey in bioplastic production, and whey is the byproduct of cheese making, and it's the liquid that separates out when the milk is curdled. And this is often rich in nutrients and discarded as wastewater, but that can cause serious environmental problems. So using whey as the carbon source in PHB production would be a great way to avoid these issues. And this is just kind of a flow chart of the creation of PHB. So the whey has to be treated, and in this case, it's turned into whey powder through spray drying. And then the whey powder is mixed with water, hydrochloric acid, and sodium hydroxide to create a whey solution for the E. coli to use as the carbon source. And then the whey solution, so the MR solution is created with trace metals and minerals for the E. coli to grow and effectively produce the HB. And all of that is combined into an incubator for fermentation, and the E. coli eventually produces PHB granules.
All right, so in my research, I decided to compare PLA and cellulose-based bioplastics. I thought this was very interesting because they both come from corn, PLA from cornstarch and cellulose-based from corn stover, which is all the leaves and stalks and all the leftover stuff. I thought that this was really interesting because they can both be used to make containers for food packaging, and they can both be composted in very similar ways and like a very similar amount of days. And so PLA is like what has been used a lot in the past. It's the most common 3D printing material, and then cellulose-based is very new technology. There's not a lot of information on it that I could find. I couldn't even find all the energy inputs needed for it. But I could find energy inputs from PLA, and so I decided to compare the process steps and the non-renewable energy within all of these steps measured in millijoules. So growing corn and extracting starch had very low megajoules of non-renewable energy, mostly from coal. And then fermentation had just a little bit. Transportation was the most. And if they just used a kind of biofuel, then this could obviously be a much better product to use. But for right now, my philosophy still stands that cellulose-based bioplastics would be better. So thank you for listening to our research today, and we would like to answer any questions that you may have.